Hello, everybody. This is Adam Serwer, and this is a very special Olympics edition of my first Blogging Heads show. And I'm here with one of my favorite writers, Anna Holmes, who is a contributor to Yahoo News. How are you doing, Anna?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. So you wrote a really awesome column about the sort of racial politics surrounding Gabby Douglas, the young African-American gymnast who won the all-around gold medal at the London Olympics this year. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that column.
Sure. I wasn't really going to comment on anything having to do with Gabby Douglas initially, just because I wanted to watch the Olympics as a fan and nothing else. But and I don't know if you remember this, but maybe a couple days before she won the all-around gold, she was being criticized in some quarters, very tiny, for her hairstyle. Yeah. And this kind of blew up into a thing that I think was bigger than what was actually going on. And I'd been asked to write about that, and I just didn't have any interest in it. But when I was watching her all-around performance, and afterwards Bob Costas, who I guess is, I don't know what you call him. He's not a commentator. He's the host of the primetime footage of the Olympics. He made a comment about her win, the all-around gold, in which he implied that barriers had already been broken down that allowed Gabby to win the gold. And I knew where he was kind of coming from, but I took issue with his assertion that the barriers had long been broken down. So that's what I started the column off with, was pushing back against that implication. And I think that, well, he also asserted that her win wasn't that meaningful. And maybe I'm misquoting him, but that was certainly what he was trying to get at. And again, I understand where he was coming from. We'd all like to live in a world in which a young African American winning the gold in a historically white sport isn't meaningful, but I think it's incredibly meaningful for a number of reasons, most of which are pretty obvious to anybody with a brain.
Right. I mean, so it was weird because it was sort of very self-congratulatory as opposed to congratulatory to Gabby. It was like, we're so awesome because this isn't a big deal.
Yes.
And that's how far we've come. And I think what's extraordinary about Costas' statement there is, like, Gabby said the exact opposite. Right? I mean, like, when she was interviewed about this, she was like, no one's going to see me coming because I'm black and I'm young and everybody is sort of underestimating me.
Right.
Which is the exact, I mean, Costas sort of implied that the only barriers were internal, sort of like in a sort of Tiger Woods type way, like, black people think they can't play golf, so, as soon as someone shatters that myth, that sort of self-conceived myth, then, the floodgates open. But it's not, but that's the exact opposite of what she said. For her, the barriers were all external. She had every certainty that she was going to make history. I mean, she was talking about it. I mean, it's sort of extraordinary for someone her age to have that level of sort of groundedness and confidence.
Absolutely.
But she didn't have a doubt in her mind. So it was weird that Costas's assumption was that she had sort of done this by overcoming some great personal insecurity, when in fact she was sort of very open about how weird it was, to move away from her family and to be, basically the only black person around for miles, and in fact how awkward that was for the white people that she knew who didn't know anything about black people. Like, it was very much not like, she was very much, this is not my problem. And Costas was sort of like, well, congratulations for getting over, your insecurities. Right. It was just a very strange, it was sort of a very strange way to react, because it was not a reaction to Gabby at all, but rather whatever sort of internal assumptions that Costas himself had made.
Yeah, I mean, I have to wonder how much of his speech, quote unquote, his little homily, as someone on Twitter called it, was written by him, or if he was just reading off a teleprompter written by some, assistant. I mean, I don't think that he said it off the cuff. He seemed to definitely be reading from something when he said that. So it's, and I'm going to just assume that he prepared the remarks himself. But, someone like Bob Costas really shouldn't be invoking internal anxieties and barriers that African Americans or really any other minority in this country, you know, might suffer or go through. Like, I'm just like, I don't want to hear what he has to say about that. I actually don't think he knows much about that, and I don't think he should be commenting on it. And I think it's strange to me, again, his assertion. Well, first of all, that, as you said, that he could kind of read her mind, you know, when she said the exact opposite well before that evening. But his assertion that the barriers, you know, that had maybe prevented her from or someone like Gabby from meddling or being on the team before were broken. I mean, gymnastics is an incredibly expensive sport. It's historically white. I mean, I think this might be as much as a class thing as a race thing, but I'm not going to separate the two. And in the column that I wrote, I quoted a little bit from some diversity studies that had been commissioned by USA Gymnastics themselves, in which, you know, they were pretty clear about the low numbers of African Americans and other minorities who were participating in gymnastics, and why that might be. They didn't get into great detail, but it's a documented fact. It's that there are barriers, economic and otherwise.
Right. I mean, it's not the 1960s, but that doesn't mean there aren't barriers.
Sure.
And I thought it was funny for Costas to invoke the sort of eternal thing was funny because I don't know if you watched the Olympic opening ceremonies, but Costas was like sort of snarking every single country that wasn't the United States. So like when Uganda came up, he was just sort of like, well, you know, Churchill called Uganda the jewel of Africa, but he never knew Idi Amin, and it's just like, wait, what? And it's just like he was like commenting on Egypt having trouble with its democratic transition in like a really sort of insensitive way, and then they got. I mean, I think the best part was when they got to Djibouti, and he was like, Djibouti. I'll never get tired of hearing that. And it's just like, dude, are you 5?
Wow.
Like it's just a weird way for an anchor to act. So like, in addition to his sort of projecting generic black first X, and this is what they must think onto Gabby, despite what she had said, he had sort of undermined his own point by during the Olympic opening ceremonies by offering up these like really bizarre generalizations about all the other countries that were besides the United States that were marching in the parade.
I missed. Well, I didn't miss the opening ceremonies, but I missed his commentary on them because I was on vacation, so I was watching them from a place that wasn't airing NBC's feed. So I heard about some of this stuff that he was saying when I logged on to Twitter the next day, but I didn't actually witness it, and I actually feel kind of grateful for that.
The sort of like non-controversy, I think that was somewhat more blown up than it was. Like a lot of people on Twitter were saying obnoxious things, but I don't know how many people actually cared.
Yeah.
But they did ask her about it, and she was sort of like, I don't care, this is my hair.
Right.
Which again is like, what I find extraordinary about that is like Gabby and also her teammate Reisman are sort of like, they're very conscious of the sort of symbolism of their own ethnic backgrounds. Like Reisman specifically, she did Hava Nagila, and she said she did it because she wanted to honor her Jewish heritage, and she dedicated her gold medals to the Israeli athletes who were killed in a terrorist attack in Munich. They're sort of both like very conscious of ethnic representational politics, but not. I mean, like there was sort of an ancient time. I mean, ancient history to me, but not really ancient histories. Like I remember reading. The Warmth of Other Suns, where Isabel Wilkerson is actually talking about when black migrants from the South would come to northern cities, there would be people waiting to explain to them how to wear their hair in public and things like that. Like just like things because they were so concerned about making sure that they were perceived in a certain way that they were really careful about stuff like that. But Gabby, despite having this like sort of very well developed sense of racial symbolism, was just like, well, this is trivial and I'm not even going to dignify it. Which again is like incredible, I think, for someone her age.
I'm not sure that she could have commented on it without it blowing up into an even bigger deal. Right. That she could have said anything quote unquote meaningful, and I'm not trying to say that she said something unmeaningful. But I mean, I think she took the best course of action. But it's interesting because when I've compared and I haven't read every single story in which she's quoted in the past, 4 months. But if you do look at stories about her from earlier in the summer versus after she won the all-around gold, she does seem to have retreated into herself a little bit. I think that's completely understandable, but she's being much more careful in what she's saying with regards to racial politics. I think she seemed more outspoken, and you just referenced one of her comments. I think it was from June, in which she said they're not going to be paying attention to me because I'm black, or something along those lines. And when you a lot of the quotes that I've seen from her after her win are just seem a little bit vaguer and more kind of PR polished.
Well, I assume now there's a lot more at stake, right?
Yep.
I mean, in terms of her financial future, she has to be a lot more careful about making sure she doesn't, I mean, I think for Olympic athletes in particular, because so many of them actually don't have a lot of money because they come from amateur sports, or the Olympics are really the moment at which they can establish livelihood, particularly since their careers can be very short depending on the sport.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering, will she compete in the next Olympics? Will she be considered too old? Will she be quote unquote too old? I mean, she'll be 20 in 4 years. This is her moment to make a significant amount of money through endorsements, and I think she should try and take home as much as she can.
Well, so with that, I think I'd actually like to transition a little bit, because there's Lolo Jones, of course, is the very famous Olympic hurdler who has who she in Beijing, she tripped on a hurdle and she didn't medal even though she was favored to win, and this time around she was sort of this great media presence. She'd just gotten a lot of coverage, and she came in fourth, and she's the fourth fastest hurdler in the world, but there was a lot of coverage implying that she was just sort of all hype, and that she was getting a lot of attention, largely because she's very attractive, but also because she sort of has a compelling story. She's biracial. Her dad was in jail. She sort of struggled really hard to get where she is, but there was this sort of, I mean, I don't know. I felt like part of what annoyed me about the coverage of her was that it was sort of blaming the game that she exists in on her.
Right.
So that there are all these expectations of, they're like, oh, well, it's just because she's pretty, or I think the New York Times column that was totally slanted was she's quote unquote exotic.
Yeah, he called her an exotic beauty.
Right. Which sort of really made me bristle.
Oh, me too.
So I have this thing. So ever since I was a kid, my mother used to do this thing where she'd my father's white and my mother's black, and I of course am very light skinned, and my mother would always whenever there was someone on TV who was the kind of black person you could pass, she'd be like, oh, that person's like you. And so I have this sort of habit left over from when I was a kid, where I just sort of keep tabs on celebrities who are quote unquote light brights.
I have a whole list, Adam. I have a whole list of them because I too am biracial, and I have a whole list of them. But yeah, right.
So the light bright thing is sort of a mix between the old toy, the light bright toy, and a sort of old phrase, an old black colloquialism, light bright and damn near white. But I like to think light bright is. I like to own it. It's not meant to be offensive. It's affectionate. But so I'd been sort of aware of her for a while, and it had been sort of rooting her, and I was sort of weirded out to find out that there was sort of a lot of hostility. I mean, if you look at her teammates, who Dawn Harper and Kelly Wells, they won the gold and the bronze respectively, and they were very sort of unhappy with Lolo because they felt like she had gotten more attention than she deserved, given the fact that she really hadn't won any significant prizes at the Olympics. And I just, I want to know what you think about this, but I sort of think that she's sort of blaming her is actually misidentifying the problem.
Oh, yeah. I agree completely. I mean, in a perfect world, she would be self-aware enough or publicly honest enough to, discuss that aspect of it. But I don't think that she's to blame for the inordinate amount of attention that she gets versus her some of her teammates who are more accomplished than she is in terms of records broken and medals won. That New York Times piece was just kind of staggeringly mean. Mm-hmm. And I think I said this on Twitter. I think the minute I saw the phrase "exotic beauty," my eyes rolled back in my head, and I kind of knew that this was just going to be a horrible piece. Although, well before that phrase appeared, it was already clear that it was going to be a horrible piece, right. Or at least a real smackdown at her. Hate the player, not the game, or vice versa. I think it's hate the game, not the player. I can't.
Right, you're supposed to hate the game.
Right, I can't.
Not pretend the game doesn't exist.
Right, you can't blame. I mean, as you just said, there are a lot of amateur athletes who spend most of their time and what little money they have, training at a breakneck pace for to appear on the world stage once every 2 or 4 years, and I don't blame her at all for doing anything she can to put money in the bank. Mm-hmm. I'm interested. I'm interested if there's... Well, listen, I do think that because she is lighter-skinned than some of her teammates, that does explain why she's gotten more attention than them. Mm-hmm. Lighter-skinned in the vocabulary of many of us equals more beautiful.
Right.
I'm not asserting that as fact or as my own opinion, but that's just the way that the world works. Mm-hmm. And
well, it's the way the United States works.
Sure. And and other parts of the world, India, parts of Asia, skin lightening creams, etc.
But this particular, the light-skinned, quote unquote exotic African American beauty is very much this sort of. This is a very well established. That she's not the first by any means.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever wonder if there's a sort of, for lack of a better word, fetish about biracial Americans? I can't...
Yes, I think there is, as a matter of fact. Especially people like Jones, I think there is.
Yeah. I just from my own experience, there's a certain type of person who finds it who just finds it very interesting that your eyes might be lighter, but your hair is dark, or the texture of your hair, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, "Oh, I would just love to have a biracial baby,"
right.
And they think that that's a compliment to me. I wouldn't say it's a complete insult, but it's a certain fetishization and objectification that makes me uncomfortable. With regards to Lolo, she's a beautiful woman. I'm not surprised that magazine editors want to put her on the cover. That's the way magazine editors work. That's how they sell magazines. I wish she was a little more self-reflective about it. I watched a video earlier today, actually, of her on the Today Show, the day after she, came in fourth in that final. And as the interview went on, she got kind of progressively more morose and sad. She did start crying, and there was a little bit too much feeling sorry for herself, I thought. Right. On the other hand, she really did get attacked quite viciously in the New York Times. She just lost, out on a medal. Right. She's been gunning for this for years, so... And
she had back surgery a year ago. It definitely wasn't... She's definitely had a hard time.
Absolutely.
I think you're totally right. She's not particularly self-aware about it, which I think makes it worse. Mm-hmm. Because I think if she could talk about it, if she could talk about it as a phenomenon external to her, I think that would change the way that people talked about her. I totally know what you're saying about the hair thing. Back when I actually, had hair, I remember people in high school used to come to me and be like, I want my kids to have hair like yours. And this was just really bizarre and weird to me because, of course, I was, a tortured mulatto kid. I just wanted to have, quote unquote normal hair like everybody else, which meant, I wanted my hair to be, not I didn't want my hair to be soft or curly. But with Lola, I just think, there is, you look at, Dawn Harper, for example, is, very angry. A lot of my female friends, especially, were sort of, it was a given for them that Dawn Harper, who, is also very attractive, was just getting less attention because she's darker skinned. Mm-hmm. And they were sort of angry about that. But this is what the New York Times piece, what made me angry about the New York Times piece was that it didn't acknowledge that this is a system that exists, that there is a fetishization of lighter-skinned African Americans, and that was driving part of the media hype over Lolo. It was just sort of it was her fault that people were looking at her like that.
Right.
And the entire centuries of cultural standards that built her up that way is just invisible, which is just infuriating because it allows us to be non-self-examining about the phenomenon of Lolo Jones that some people feel like it's harmful.
Yep. Well, it's also just continues in the tradition of overanalyzing and objectifying black women's appearance,
Right.
Which I'm sick to death of. I wonder, did it ever occur to the writer, whose name I think is J.R. Longman, did it ever occur to him to kind of get into the weeds a little bit more or I wonder, did he write something along those lines and then it get excised? Did he just not think about that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and he quoted a lot of sort of sports people, but it didn't occur. It was just weird that it didn't occur to him to say talk to an Africana Studies professor
Sure.
About this, because again, this is not sort of a new phenomenon.
Right.
What I do find interesting in general about this Olympics in particular is that I feel like the women athletes of this Olympics have overshadowed the male athletes for the most part, in a way, particularly on the American side. On the American side, you have guys like Michael Phelps and Ryan Lochte, but other than that, I would be hard-pressed to tell you the name of a male American Olympic athlete off the top of my head. I mean, I can tell you, I can name the women's beach volleyball team. I can talk about Destiny Hooker, who's the star player on the women's volleyball team. Obviously I know Lolo. There are so many. The women's soccer team was amazing. Yep. They won the gold. It's actually kind of interesting to me, and I think other people have noticed as well, just the degree to which the American Olympians really shine this year.
Yeah.
And I think it's sort of been funny. I mean, I like watching the women's soccer game yesterday. There were definitely conservatives on my Twitter feed and people who wouldn't identify as feminists, totally rooting hard for the women's soccer team and watching the game and just feeling so proud of it. And it's interesting to me because this is a legacy. I think it's fair to say that this is the legacy of, one of the more controversial things, which is laws, which is Title IX, obviously, which, forced colleges to put more money into women's athletics and therefore cultivate the exact kind of talent that produces these types of exceptional women athletes.
Were you seeing anyone in your Twitter feed on the conservative side who made any direct references to Title IX?
No one made any references to Title IX. It was all liberals or feminists on my Twitter feed who were saying, "Yeah, Title IX." But I definitely didn't see that. There was a Sally Jenkins Washington Post column about the American women in the Olympics, and how meaningful this particular Olympics has been. There was a stat. I don't think that it was from her column. I saw it on Twitter because I'm always on Twitter. From a couple days ago that said that out of the 34 gold medals that the U.S. had won at that point, 23 of them had been won by women, which is 2/3 of the gold medal haul, and I wouldn't be surprised if that ratio stayed the same or if it had increased a bit because of yesterday's water polo game and the soccer final. I mean, I think that I have been a little bit surprised myself at how much more interested I have been in watching some of the matches and games involving women more so than men. I found the swimming quite boring, at least the men's swimming. The two Olympic sports that I actually find kind of tedious are biking and swimming.
I was very into swimming, 4 years ago, and into this whole journey of Phelps. But I just found him. I found him in Lochte quite tiring and kind of a joke, which is a horrible thing to say. But I was much more into the women's swimming team and the gymnastics, and I didn't watch any biking. Track and field is my favorite, and I like that we're ending on the note of having track and field because as much as I like gymnastics, I do feel
track and field is pretty great.
Well, it's just the raw power of the athletes in competition, particularly the women.
I think it's so interesting how different the women track and field athletes behave compared to the male track and field athletes. I mean, I don't know if you watch the sprinters.
Yes.
But the male sprinters are constantly mugging for the camera.
Yes, and craning.
and like you look at like the female sprinters and the women's sprinters, and they're first of all, like they're all like super concentrated and focused, and they don't mess around at all. It's just really they're just like all disciplined, as opposed to the like, well, you know, the male runners, they're sort of, you know, it's almost like watching like WWE, like where they're like hyping themselves up and like talking about what they're going to do. It's I mean, it's both, it's fun in its different ways.
Well, do you find it at all unseemly what the male sprinters are doing? Because there are times when I feel a little bit uncomfortable with it, and then I wonder.
I think it's a little weird when they like flirt with the camera.
Yeah.
But like one of my favorite moments recently with the sort of when they were like when they were panning across to each, you know, male track runner was when Usain Bolt dapped the Olympic technical assistant who was standing behind him, and he just like had this grin on his face.
This is last night, right?
Yeah,
I know. No, that made me so happy. That whole moment made me very happy.
It's just like what, like first of all, it was awesome that Bolt wasn't just like, oh, who are you?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? He has said, you know, point blank, I'm the greatest athlete ever. But he's still like, hey man, what's going on?
Yeah. No.
I just thought that was really cool. And he's like, there's something about Bolt in particular who's like, his cockiness somehow does not make him irritating.
I don't find it irritating. I think maybe with someone else I would, but you know, I think what gives me pause is my understanding that men of color cannot get away with boasting or bragging in the same way that, let's say, white men can. That the men of color are not supposed to ever be, you know, arrogant or uppity or all these other sorts of words to describe expressing pride in your achievements. So when I see criticism of him for being boastful, I have to be very careful not to react negatively to the criticism because I feel somewhat protective of him. But you know, his boastfulness does not bother me. I think he knows it's all in good fun. He has every reason to boast. But there are some times when they, you know, have been panning across the lanes of the sprinters, and there's a little bit of showboating going on that I just don't like. But perhaps because I prefer the way that the women are. I prefer their kind of intense focus. I mean, you know, they wave at the camera once in a while, but they seem to be much more internally focused than the men.
Yeah, they're really intense in a way the men aren't. Although I have to say I think the sprinters are the most flamboyant of the track and field athletes. The others aren't quite as I'm not sure how to say it. They're not quite as in your face with the camera. But I just I think with Bolt in particular, it's the little moments of sort of humility that I think make him endearing. So like when he dapped the Olympic assistant, also he like stopped talking during an interview to for the U.S. national
I think
anthem.
it was Sonia Richards-Ross's gold medal ceremony. Yeah, that he stopped talking to a Spanish woman, a reporter. Yeah, that was great. You know, he actually dapped another technical assistant a couple days before, this past Tuesday, but he kind of faked him out, and I only know this because I made a comment online about how much I loved his little, you know, dapping of last night, and someone sent me a GIF of him faking out the technical assistant from a couple days before. So he is not. I don't think that he kind of lives in a rarefied place. I mean, he does make a lot of money, and he's very famous, and he's, you know, it's extremely successful. But I don't get the sense that he thinks that he's better than anyone as a human being. You know, he acknowledges those around him in a way that I find very refreshing and fun, and he seems to have a lot of fun with it. And also, I loved that last night, you know, 3 Jamaicans won.
Yeah.
I just thought it was fantastic. So.
I think that's never happened before.
Yeah,
I can't decide. I can't remember whether it's happened. I think maybe the U.S. has done it once, but I actually think it's never happened before.
Yeah. And that just makes me happy. And I don't think he knew that the bronze medalist, that Jamaican runner had won until, you know, at least half a minute after the race ended. At least judging from the footage last night. But that was definitely a lot of fun. There are some times when they're preening makes me uncomfortable, but that's the case with a lot of people who like to show off. I don't always like extroverts, and I'm not sure that the female sprinters could get away with that sort of behavior. To be honest with you, which is maybe part of the reason why they don't do it.
I don't know. I think. Well, I mean, speaking of sort of like structural obstacles, I think it's. I mean, generally generally I like to root for the U.S., but I don't. I'm certainly like not disappointed to see like, especially particularly in a lot of the running events. I mean, like you see a lot of the poorer countries really sort of evening the score, and I think in part because they're less, sort of. I mean, it's a less expensive set of events to train for. But it is sort of like cool to see. I mean, like you said, there are a lot. There are countries that you don't see represented at other events, like Grenada and the Dominican Republic, that you just don't see represented in a lot of other events that like actually sort of get to make a dent when it comes to this stuff. And I think that's sort of in a very obvious way. That's because it's the kind of sport that is, I think, costs less money to get rid of.
Yeah, it's just more accessible. It's just, I mean, kind of like baseball. Like the reason that you see so many these professional baseball players coming from other parts of the world, particularly Latin America, is because you don't actually need that much money to learn how to play and to play baseball. You need a field and a mitt and some balls and a bat. Whereas, downhill skiing, I mean, maybe that's not fair for me to compare the two, but...
Well, right. I mean, like, downhill skiing is sort of like, and how many families have, like, and, you sort of have to have a certain amount of money to get, like, a winter membership
and live near mountains, where, in a climate where it snows. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, speaking of baseball and sort of American sports, I'm sort of... we were talking a bit the other day about the sort of identity politics of the Romney-Obama election, and I think this election is really interesting because it's the first time that in sort of like my living political memory where the Republicans didn't have sort of an aw shucks guy running for office, just because I think like the last The last election I can really remember paying attention to before becoming an adult was Bush Gore, and that was the first election that I voted in. And I'm sort of used to the Republicans having someone who can sort of pretend to be a regular guy, and Romney really can't pretend to be a regular guy. And there's a way in which I think like a lot of the election is sort of. I think it's actually pretty substantive, but the substance also reflects very, to a certain extent, like policy disputes are very rooted in identity in the United States, and you see sort of there is a sort of tug of war over who is more American. And I think you sort of see this from both sides in the way that Romney, Obama, and not necessarily, I mean, I don't think Obama accuses Romney of being foreign or anything like that, but he sort of says, this guy, this is the boss. He doesn't understand what you're dealing with. Whereas Romney says things like, he literally says things like, Obama just doesn't understand America, which is a really...
My first reaction to what you just said was, well, Romney's not the first person to say those sorts of things about Obama. I mean, are you surprised that he's talked about him in those terms? Because that was happening during 2008.
Well, right. But he's been like sort of. I think of like Newt Gingrich's food stamp president, and he's like been much. His like general "you're not American" stuff has been, I think, for the most part, generic and not tied to race. Whereas until we got into this whole welfare discussion this week. But like, whereas, I mean, that moment in the South Carolina primary where Newt Gingrich was like lecturing Juan Williams and he turned it into a commercial, I mean, that was kind of unbelievable. But I just think it's interesting because they're both so American. I mean, like, people, there's a non-trivial amount of people who think Mormonism and people who are religious who think Mormonism in particular is weird, but I mean, like, the fact is, it's very American. It's a religion that was invented here. And you look at President Obama, and he's like, when he says, in no country on earth is my story even possible. I mean, that's very true. I mean, like, these are both two, like, in their own very different ways, like, culturally, quintessentially American people. So it's weird to see the lines drawn this way, except that, a lot, I think it's obviously easier for people to understand things through sort of cultural symbolism than, get really deep down into, marginal tax rates.
I agree with you that both Mormonism and, let's say, Obama and his background are uniquely American, but how many, what percentage of the populace do you think understands that? I'm not confident that even 10% of them do. I'm not confident that the definition...
About Obama or about Romney?
Well, let's say about Obama. I'm not confident that everything that we celebrate about the United States, its diversity, etc., actually translates into the idea of being American. I made a little bit of a reference to that in that Gabby Douglas column. The idea of all American, and then the term all around, which is the medal she won. Just that by winning the gold, that she was changing our concepts of what an all-American young woman looked like.
Sure.
Because I don't think that an African-American 16-year-old is under the dictionary definition of all-American. It'd be someone more like Sean Johnson, someone blonde. But now I'm just curious to know how many, if you really, what you think about that disconnect.
Well, I think that the people who don't think that would never vote for him anyway.
Yeah.
But I think so. I think those of us who get stuck really in sort of the media and minutiae, and we see the sort of dog whistles get blown every day. But I think the average American sees Obama with his kids and their dog, and I just think that he sort of he hit the best weapon against the sort of implication that he's not really culturally American is himself. I think it's really the sort of accusation of alienness is really incongruous with him when he opens his mouth. But I think I do think that one of the weirder phenomenons I've noticed recently is that when people, so I've seen a couple of pundits do this, is when Obama gets sort of accused of not being American, people will be like, well, ask Bin Laden about that, which is a really weird way to respond, which is because it reduces sort of American identity to sort of gang affiliation. Right. It's blood in, blood out. And he's proved his worthiness to the tribe by eliminating its most hated enemy. And I do think there is a way in which, I do think we are still at the point at where people who are not, who don't fit a relatively arbitrary understanding of quote unquote all Americanness do have to sort of pay their dues in a weird way. But I think that with Obama, that ship has already kind of sailed. People sort of know him, and I think it's sort of the alien thing. I just don't think it works anymore because the country's known him for 4 years. They've seen him play with his kids, take his wife out on dates.
So you don't find it troubling? You don't think it has much influence?
I think that it appeals to a very specific segment of people. And what I'll say is that it has influence. Certainly it reinforces what people who would like to think this think. But I don't think it's persuasive. You know what I mean? I think it's not. I think it obviously matters how we talk about these things and how where we draw the lines in terms of American culture and whether we draw them so that a lot of people who are culturally American end up on the other side of that. But I don't think it's persuasive in the sense that I think that kind of frame really only appeals to a certain segment of people who are really unlikely to support him anyway. But of course, he's not the important person here, right? It's not so much that it'll hurt Obama in some way to draw the lines like this. I think the greater concern, and I think this may be what you're getting at, is that to draw Obama outside of that line culturally really also draws a whole lot of other people. writes a lot of other people out of American culture, which I think is actually worrying and problematic in a way that I don't think it really has much of an impact on the election itself.
I'd be curious to know if this kind of othering of, well, let's say of Romney, who's not an everyman in the sense that he's a rich capitalist and he's also a Mormon. I'm wondering if the Obama campaign will do any dog whistles themselves, along those lines. I haven't really been aware of any, and I kind of don't think they will. But will there be a kind of line of attack? Well, they certainly attacked him for his money,
right?
But will there be any sort of attack against Romney with regards to his religion?
I really hope not. I get really uncomfortable when people start talking about, people start making fun of Mormonism, just because, being Jewish, being a religious minority, it just makes me really uncomfortable, especially like the magic underwear jokes, because of course Orthodox Jews also wear, ritual underwear. Like it just sort of makes me deeply uncomfortable, and I don't know if the Obama campaign will go there. They've certainly gone there with regards to his wealth, and I think so this is one of the ways in which I think it's not really a dog whistle; it's a foghorn. But you remember the ad where Romney is singing "America the Beautiful,"
it was a great ad,
and it's just like they're saying, that is a sort of, even though the argument is like primarily economic, this is a guy who wants to make money and he doesn't actually care about what happens to you while he's doing it, so you really shouldn't elect him president. Mm-hmm. The sort of America the Beautiful thing, him singing America the Beautiful off key, I think it really is sort of trying to say this is someone who doesn't, how loyal is he with his Swiss bank accounts? I mean, it's sort of, it's certainly not, I'm not one to clutch the pearls when it comes to political advertising. It's actually not as nasty as I think it has been, or it was a long time ago in particular. But I do think that there is wealth is a cultural marker as well as an economic marker, right? I mean, that's why you see a lot of wealthy people trying to, doing a lot of cultural signifying in order to hide their wealth. Yeah. I mean, how many wealthy people do you know who sort of dress schlubby?
Sure, or drive 20-year-old Volvos.
Right. I mean, there is a sense in which there's wealth and actual wealth and then cultural wealth, and I think there's certainly a way in which there's a cultural aspect to the Obama campaign critique of Romney that goes beyond just this dude has a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Since the Obamas don't have anywhere close to as much as money as Romney, but they're still rich forever.
Yeah. It's interesting because talking about you were talking about Obama, and we've known him for 4 years, and the idea that he could be successfully othered to a large segment of the population is kind of absurd at this point. There are certain times when I wonder whether he isn't doing things in order to appear safer. It's not so much what he says, but even when he shows up at baseball games to throw out the first pitch wearing that dad jeans,
right.
It makes me wonder sometimes whether that wasn't something he did, in a studied way, or whether he really honestly just wants to wear.
Well, I think they've been pretty obvious about that. I mean, I think, the 2008 campaign, the big thing was, here's Obama with his white family.
Yeah.
That commercial was the big, I think, the most memorable instance of Obama doing something to be, to actively, prevent himself from seeming, somehow different, to a large segment of the population. But I think, he definitely didn't attend the NAACP convention or the La Raza convention. And I think they definitely, I think this is something they're aware of. I mean, it's not a coincidence that Obama goes to black crowds and, says things like, turn the PlayStation off, gotta get Pookie off the couch. And the Pookie thing, I sort of can't believe well, I guess maybe he hasn't done it this year, but he used to do it all the time during the 2008 campaign. But I think he definitely makes those kinds of choices. I'm not sure exactly how I feel about those choices, but I definitely think you're right that he does. That the campaign does think tactically about how to make sure that the president doesn't fulfill
Mm-hmm.
the expectations that his opponents frequently.
I'd love to know how those conversations go between, his aides and himself, or how exactly.
I want to know who's in those conversations.
Yeah.
Is it just like Obama and Jarrett, or is it like Obama and Jarrett and Axelrod, or like is it like I think it's I would like to be a fly on the wall.
Oh, absolutely.
During those conversations, if they happen, which I guess we're speculating that they do, but who knows?
Sure. Well, I'm also curious to know whether you think, should he be reelected, will there be a kind of exhale, at least the ability for him to exhale, to kind of show himself more? I mean, people complain that he's icy or chilly or cold or hard to read, or we don't know him, and again, this can run the gamut from he's so controlled to making it sound like it's some sort of conspiracy, that Obama is up to no good, because he is not he's not Bill Clinton. Do you think he'll be able? Well, do you think his personality will change markedly if he gets reelected? Because he,
I don't know. That's a good question. Are we going to see Obama? I mean, I think, and correct me, are we going to see Obama being, behaving more like in a like? Is he going to feel more comfortable being like culturally black in front of a mass audience?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like I think there's a GIF on the internet that's like I think it's like How to Speak Two Languages, where he's like walking through somewhere, and I think it's a restaurant, and there are food workers, and he like shakes the white guy's hand, and then he gives a dap hug to the black guy right next to him, and it's just sort of like a funny GIF, right? But it sort of expresses this, the term which I absolutely love is code switching.
Right.
And everybody code switches, but the racial cultural dividing line in the United States remains salient. So this is one of the obvious ways in which it happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I don't know if I don't know that he's holding anything back now. I mean, I think the tactical decisions he makes about what events he goes to and how he appears are maybe a little bit. Are sort of a related question, but I don't know. I think I mean I don't know. I can't say I know him at all or well enough to say whether that's true, but it's sort of an interesting question.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously when you're reelected to a second term, there are a lot of other options in terms of feeling free to do certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Politically,
well, that's the big Republican fear, right? Is that the second term
he's going to take away all
the neo-communist agenda really comes into play.
Yeah, and if that doesn't happen, then I wonder what the other paranoia or conspiracy will be, or whether they'll finally just give up.
He's going to finally ban all weapons.
Okay, but like, what happens when it's like 1 month away from the end of his term, and none of these things have come true? I mean,
he's going to show up at a Jay-Z concert. He's going to crowd surf. He's going to get up on stage. It's going to be awesome.
Oh man. Well, I hate to say it, but I am. Well, I know that you're a pessimist about him getting reelected. At least.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a pessimist. I am. I think that I think that at the moment, if I were betting, I would bet on Mitt Romney, just because
really?
I think. Yeah, I actually did bet. I actually bet $50, and I bet $50 with Jamel Bowie. So now it's public. It's not just between us. With American Prospect writing fellow Jamel Bowie, I bet him $50 that Mitt Romney would win, because I just think I don't think Obama's leading in the polls, but I suspect that the economy is going to slow down, partially because of the Euro mess and everything like that, and we're not really seeing how bad things are going to get yet. And despite and even now, I think Obama's sort of defying gravity in terms of how well he's doing. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's not true. I mean, I don't really know what's going to happen, but I actually did put money on Obama losing just because I'm very much an economic determinist, and I don't see the economy growing enough to keep him in office.
Okay, so what would have to happen? I mean, basically, the economy would have to turn around somewhat significantly between now and Election Day for you to believe that Obama had a chance. I mean, are you? Well,
I think he has a chance, but I think that as far as growth is concerned, I think it has to be above 2% in the last couple quarters for him to really win. But that's things obviously with the country the way it is, it's so polarized. I mean, there are small things at the margins that are going to make a difference: candidate quality, campaigns, yada yada yada. But yes, I actually did bet that Obama would lose.
Okay, so, which brings me to something else I actually want to get your take on, which is Mitt Romney and his taxes, and what's going to happen with that.
I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know why he hasn't released them. I mean, it's
because
sort
there's
of
something bad in there.
Well, right, maybe there's something bad in there, or maybe he just is indignant about the idea that he'd have to release his taxes, and in principle, he's just like, no, screw you, you don't get to pry into my life like that, and I'm not going to... I mean, it's sort of crazy to me. I mean, the longer this goes on, the more it seems like there must be something terrible hiding in there, but if there's something terrible hiding in there, then wouldn't we sort of already... I mean, like, I kind of feel like we'd already know. Someone from the McCain camp would have said, Romney... Or, it's the kind of, like, how long, I mean, because he handed over 10 years of tax returns when he was being vetted to be McCain's running mate. I mean, if there is really some terrible, horrible secret other than, like, Mitt Romney really didn't pay a whole lot in taxes, I kind of had a feeling we'd know it already.
Well, who would have seen that information the last time around when he was being vetted by McCain? Like, what, 3 people?
Well, the McCain people, really disliked Romney. McCain disliked Romney strongly. They were rivals, and Romney switched positions on a number of issues in order to attack McCain from his right. I mean, like, I sort of feel like there might be an inkling, some Republican operative who had worked for McCain who, like, didn't want Romney to win during the primary would have said, hey, you should really look into blah, blah. And it would have ended up somewhere. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine that maybe there is something terrible. But I just think it's a head scratcher. Like, I don't know why he hasn't released his tax returns. I think it's sort of a basic transparency thing. Yeah. Like, if you're running for president, people need to know where your financial strings are because they need to know, when they might get pulled. But obviously for him, he said, well, and what arouses even more suspicion is the fact that he said, well, I don't want to release it because the Democrats are just going to attack me over what's in there. And it's like, well, that's not actually a good reason not to release them. I mean, it's a good reason for you to be worried about it, but it's not, from a transparency and accountability perspective, it's not actually a good reason.
If he's not releasing them just out of stubbornness, then I do kind of admire that. I think he should release them, but he is catching flack from enough people and from all sides that if he continues to be obstinate and refuse to release them, and not cave under pressure. I mean, there's just something that I have to admire. I mean, listen, there isn't a lot for me to admire about Mitt Romney, if anything. Yeah.
Well, wouldn't it be amazing, though, if he ultimately releases his tax returns and it's like he paid, like, a low tax rate, but it's, like, completely anticlimactic and it's not, like, in the single digits or something like that? I mean, wouldn't that be sort of amazing if, like, there was this huge thing over basically nothing?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing is, if it is basically nothing, then he's actually actively hurting himself by prolonging this.
Yeah. I have to wonder how much of that is the topic of conversation on any given day within the past 2 or 3 weeks among himself and his advisors. Is that all that they're kind of strategizing about, or are they? I mean, they seem to be making a lot of blunders, but I'm wondering how much the pressure is getting to them, especially since Huntsman Sr. said to Greg Sargent earlier today that he thinks he should release the taxes as well.
Well, the Huntsmans, of course, have been, they're Republicans, but they sort of have the knives out for Romney a little bit. Huntsman and Romney obviously, like, really disliked each other during the primary. But so he probably just enjoyed twisting the knife.
Yeah.
But and of course there's this whole thing with Reid, which is, like, just one of the most blatant acts of trolling I've ever seen. I mean, obviously, like, it really is, like, sort of. I mean, I've never seen a grown man troll another grown man like that in my life. I mean, obviously, like, Reid. I don't know what information Reid has, but he's obviously, like, I think he's obviously making an accusation that he can't substantiate. Which is problematic for all sorts of reasons. But I'm sort of
or won't substantiate. I mean, I don't know.
Romney can substantiate.
Okay,
it.
Right.
Reid can't.
Right.
Because Reid he's getting the information secondhand,
right.
So he's really making sort of. It's gossip. In a fundamental way, of course, it's gossip that puts Romney in the uncomfortable situation of being able to say this isn't true, and proving it, but refusing to do that.
Right.
But I'm just sort of marveling at. Like, because I don't think I've ever seen anyone... trolling is sort of, I think it's a wonderful word, and it's sort of for the phenomenon of expressing false concern for the purpose of screwing over someone who you actually don't like.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before, sort of since I started really paying attention to politics.
Well, you haven't seen it in politics. You haven't seen it coming from a Democrat.
I definitely haven't seen it. I definitely haven't seen it coming from a Democrat.
Do you wish there were more of it? I mean, like the really childish part of me does.
I don't know. I sort of hate. I kind of. I mean, like I think part of the reason why I find a lot of the election tedious is because I think most of the stuff we end up like pulling our like the media ends up pulling its hair out over every day is like completely meaningless. Mm-hmm. Like the Hillary Rosen thing, like that actually had a sort of like a substantive thing to talk about in there. But just like there are sort of these silly things that happen that we end up spending day in and day. This is what I call the dumb guys.
Yeah.
Which is like when we spend day in, day out talking about something that only means something to people on like cable television, and it just sort of drives me nuts.
Well, I mean, I don't know if we talk about it day in and day out because I feel like every day there's something new.
Right.
But the Harry Reid thing, it has been quite sustained. I mean,
right, it's been going on. It's been going on for weeks now, and Reid sort of doesn't care. I mean, people are saying all sorts of people are pointing out that he doesn't he can't substantiate his claims. And they're just going after him hard, and he doesn't care.
Yeah, which again, I wish I saw more evidence of that coming from certain Democrats. I know that's it's easy for me to complain about Democrats, and they certainly get a lot of flack for supposed lack of spine. But as I said, the childish part of me would like to see a little more of what Harry Reid is doing. I mean, I don't think he's making it up. Mm-hmm. I don't know who his source is, but I don't think he's making it up.
Well, he's not making it. I don't think he's just like making it up out of whole cloth, but he has no idea if it's true.
Right. Well, but I'd have to think that he wouldn't have said anything publicly if he didn't respect where it was coming from.
See, I disagree with you there. I think he said something publicly because he knows it makes Romney uncomfortable.
Okay, so he only... Okay, all right. Well, I think it could be both.
I think that is perfectly within Harry Reid, who is an excellent politician and a very good politician in terms of the actual, I'm not talking about what's in his soul, but in terms of his ability to do things I think he's a very capable politician, and I think he knows exactly what he's doing.
Okay, fair enough. I think it might be a combination of both those things, that he trusts his source and that he wants to publicly embarrass Romney.
Yeah, well, it's certainly it's working, at least for right now.
Yeah, well, at least it's entertaining me. I mean, although I have to say that since the Olympics started, I've been paying a lot less attention to political news.
Well, yeah, the Olympics are wonderful, and I'm going to be very sad when they're over. If for the only reason because we won't have like big breaking news every day that has nothing to do with the election.
Right. And because we won't have as good of a reason to complain about NBC.
Sure.
As we did before. Yeah.
I mean, I sort of enjoy being able to go home and like watch the. I definitely like have my issues with quote unquote Olympic spoilers, but I do enjoy being able to go at home and watch the stuff that obviously I want to watch at prime time.
So you're not watching live feeds?
No, I'm not watching live feeds.
But you're seeing people tweet.
I'm seeing people tweet, so like I've definitely had plenty of Olympic spoilers.
But you don't mind that?
No, it actually kind of drives me nuts, but there's nothing you can do about it. But like I try to when I'm at home and I'm watching with my girlfriend, I definitely like I won't tell her the Olympic spoilers because she's a doctor and she's like in the operating room all day, and so she doesn't know the spoilers. Yeah. So I keep them to myself. I
don't mind the spoilers. Well, first of all, I am watching live feeds sometimes, but I suspect that you're a lot busier during the day than I am, which is a good reason not to watch them. But yeah, I do like watching them in prime time. You can actually go onto your cable providers. I think NBC has on demand for each competition, so if you want to watch them that way,
that's really cool.
A tip.
Well, with that, I think we should close out.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being my first guest.
Thanks for having me.
And it was great talking to you, and take care.
Okay, you too.
All right, thanks a lot.
Bye.